Hey everyone, welcome back to this episode of CMDB ITOM Chat. As always, I'm your host here, Scott Trumbull, and we're here with some of our team to continue talking about some of the things that affect your CMDB. We've talked about some things before, some of the new features in CMDB and leveraging all of those and getting those things in place. Today, and in this session, we got an opportunity. Ken Dowdle, who some of you might remember, he was spoke to us a while back about just enough admin. It's been one of our most popular topics and gotten a lot of comments and interest on the website. So Ken was coming back today to talk about what is a common topic, because we tend to use these words interchangeably, but they really don't mean the same thing. When we talk about assets, or we talk about configuration management, or IT asset management, or configuration management, we get a lot of confusion around that term asset or that term CI. And anyway, so Ken's got together, he's put some thought into this and was hoping to come on and maybe demystify this a little bit, clarify. So when we're talking to each other, we're using the same terminology when we're talking about the same thing. So on that note, I'll hand it over to Ken, one of our solutions architects and one of the all-being knowing masters of IT hardware and software asset management.
All right, thanks, Scott. So yeah, I'm going to go over some of the differences between assets and CI. I know some organizations use them interchangeably, but they don't really understand the difference. So assets and CIs are really just two sides of the same coin. They're separate places within ServiceNow, but they're kept in sync. So if you want to think about an asset is something that you can kick, you can touch, you care about its purchase cost, its depreciation, the financials around it, something like that. It could be things like documenting the service status, what its end of life is, what it's just, what you're going to do when that asset leaves your organization. Is it going to be destroyed? How are you going to get sensitive data off it? It has things like associated contracts, maintenance contracts, warranties, licenses in the case of software, things like that. And you're expected to be able to track inventory on that. Whereas a configuration item is really just, it's a component of your infrastructure that you monitor and track. You track the technical specifications, things like RAM, operating system, configuration files, things like that. This is the one that would be associated with, say, an incident, a problem, or a change. So there's something broken or you need something changed in your infrastructure, that's where you would associate incident, problem, change. And you need to know, key to the CMDB, you need to know what its relationship is. So a server, for example, could be a virtual server, which wouldn't be an asset, for example, but it's related to, say, a physical ESX box, that maybe runs an application server related to a database, things like that. So let's kind of, let me just change my page here. So this is really a key slide here. Configuration management in itself is just this circle of life in the middle, right? So whereas asset management really is the whole life cycle. You've requested a physical asset. Let's say a network switch, for example. You got a new Cisco switch coming in. You want to manage that from the request to when it's end of life and it's leaving your organization. Configuration management really only cares about when it's on the network and it's functioning. How is it configured? How are we supporting it? How are we monitoring it? How are we deploying it? How are we pulling it? How are we pulling that out? Whereas asset management is really the whole end-to-end process, right? And there is some overlap, but yeah, so IT asset management is not configuration management. Configuration management doesn't care about the financials or the contracts or any of that stuff around the physical IT. And again, a virtual asset, I always bring that up, a virtual server is not an asset. A virtual server is definitely a CI, but it's not an asset, for example. So we can see
I really love, Ken, back on that other slide you were showing, I really love how this describes that difference in life cycle between the asset lifecycle, that thing you talked about, the asset lifecycle, that cradle to grave, or sometimes it's referred to now as the cradle to cradle, because things get reused and go into our recycling program. But that cradle to grave on the asset side versus that, and I love how this shows in and out of stock, that on the configuration item side, as a configuration item side, it could cycle many times around in there, but it's only one asset, meaning, and end user components are a great example, right? I might have a laptop that, it's only purchased once. Its asset runs through one time and it's eventually disposed when it's no longer of value, but it may go multiple times out to different people in my organization. So I might deploy it to one person, as it shows in that move, add, change. It has a support life cycle. It's, as you mentioned, monitored. They might be done with it, goes back into stock and out to somebody else. That could happen. I just really think this shows that really well, that difference of a circular approach for the CI's life versus, in the door, out the door for the asset.
Yeah, it definitely does. And another good use case would be like tablets, for example, like Apple iPads or things like that. That's a type of asset that gets checked in and checked out a lot, or loaner laptops or things like that. We're not just talking about, a physical server that gets slotted into a rack and it stays there until its end of life. There's a lot of things that rotate through, and we've got a lot of customers that have specialized equipment, a lot of medical devices, things like that. And that's where, the end-to-end, they're high ticket items there. So they definitely want to be tracked financially, but also they need to be tracked configuration wise as well. So thank you, Scott. This next slide here, sort of a Venn diagram of, how the two sides can interact. So an asset could be things like software licenses, consumables being things like mice, keyboards, things like that. Those are assets, but they're not CIs because we really don't care about tracking them that way. And like I said before, virtual items, Nutanix servers, ESX, cloud resources, things like that. Those are virtual items, and they're configuration items only because they don't have financial implications on a physical device. I mean, they do have financial ramifications, but that's more on a contract thing. And services, where they cross over is like servers, routers, switches, enterprise storage, SAN arrays, things like that. They're physical things. They have contracts and they have configurations, right? So yeah, that's a real key difference. And this slide sort of breaks out how it can be different throughout, various organizations, but in general, all organizations have servers. They all have workstations and desktops. They all have enterprise network hardware and appliances. They all have SANs and storage and enterprise software, things like that.
So I really love the call out on there. And one of the things that I love to remind people of too, when we're talking about assets in the IT space, you basically have three classes of assets. You might have a hardware asset, a consumable asset, or a software asset. There's some other things that come out in the world out there, but I would push back on any customer that wants to create a new class of asset in there. Those three, they cover it, and a lot of things are built into the system around that. On the other side of that coin that you mentioned is those CIs, where out of the box, there's more than 700 classes of configuration items just out of the box. And it's very common for people to create new ones in those cases. So that's, another big difference on there. And one of the other things I really like to highlight on here is kind of that when we talk about this, and we love to talk about ITOM here, is that, we discover CIs. We don't necessarily discover assets. We discover CIs, and then our configuration, and a little hint to the world, if you ever interview with me for an ITOM role, I will probably ask you this question. The system will determine, based on how we've configured our model rules and our asset rules for a model, will determine whether or not we want to create a matching asset, whether we create that other side of the coin, whether it's a virtual server here or it's a physical server sitting on a rack based on those models. So that is just absolutely fantastic. So I know if people want to ask any more or dig a little deeper into how this might affect their environment, they could certainly reach out to us or get Ken in there to talk about this with them. So I appreciate you coming back on today, Ken. And I know you're going to be coming up. You have a future session coming up with us to kind of talk about how we talked about where they're different, but you're going to also kind of highlight why that mature CMDB is important for that asset management. You know, how those things tie together and how it's, like I mentioned, we discover CIs, how those things tie together. So that's it. We're going to be coming back to some more of our team in additional episodes, talking about that, talking about their experiences, the importance of a mature CMDB to incident management and problem and change and asset management. So if you want to hear more from Ken, that's where we talk about it. So thanks again, and we'll see everybody here back. Same ITOM time, same ITOM channel.